So almost a year ago, I started a series where I've been telling you my favorite movie from every single year. I started with the 1930s, went video by video through every decade, and today, it's finally time to close this thing out with my favorite movie from every year since 2000. 23 years with no time to waste. Let's do this. What's going on, my friends? Welcome again to the Cobwebs channel. My name is Daniel, and yeah, rather than going decade by decade, we're going to close this with a bang. 23 years in one video. I've actually got another decade series that I'm wanting to start, so we got to finish this thing off. So let's kick off with 2000. Not exactly a banner year for me, but there is one movie that stands out. Not a movie I've seen in a long time, but I remember I loved it when I saw it, and that is Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. Epic martial arts fantasy from director Ang Lee, starring Chow Yun-fat and Michelle Yeoh. Man, Michelle Yeoh is awesome in this movie. This is just like mythic fantasy on a level that I want to see in American movies more often, but kind of rarely do. It's got the amazing action with the martial arts and the wire fu. It's got really great and interesting romance in this movie between two pretty fascinating characters. And yeah, it's got Michelle Yeoh just being awesome. I have this copy on VHS, which I thought was pretty cool to show you. And for 2001, another movie that I have on VHS, and that is The Others, classic haunted house film starring Nicole Kidman. I've talked about this movie a lot on my channel recently. I've talked about the incredible gothic atmosphere of this old English country house. I have talked about Nicole Kidman's amazing performance, kind of unlikable, but creepy and always interesting. I talked about the great twist and how much I love the ending, how it's frightening, but almost beautiful at the same time, and a great way to take the haunted house genre in a way it hadn't really been taken before. And it's just a fantastic movie. One I saw way back in the day and actually wasn't too impressed by, but I don't know, seeing it with fresh eyes on the recently released Criterion Blu-ray, I was just really blown away by The Others. It's become one of my favorite haunted house films of all time. Now in 2002, I did see in the theaters with my dad and my brother a movie that has come to mean so much to me, but I'm not going to pick it because I'm actually going to talk about its sequel in a couple of years. So let's do something a little bit more interesting and talk about Studio Ghibli's Spirited Away. Now, this movie is really important to me because it's really the movie that opened my mind up to foreign films. Before I saw this, I hadn't really seen a lot of foreign films. And when I saw this movie, it just dawned on me that if I watch movies from other countries, from other cultures, I can see things that I've just never even thought about before. This is a Japanese anime film from Studio Ghibli, first anime film I ever saw as well. And the visuals are beautiful, striking, incredible animation, but also just there is imagination on display that I've never, not necessarily like on a level I've never seen an American film, but just different than I've ever seen an American movie. It's a movie that's come to mean a lot to me. It could be my favorite animated film of all time, to be honest with you. And the musical score is one of my favorites of all time. If you're not sure if you want to watch this movie, maybe you haven't seen a lot of anime or Studio Ghibli, I would just look up the main theme and listen to that, and you will immediately want to watch this movie. Now, I'm not doing a lot of honorable mentions in this video because who's got time for that? But I do want to shout out Pirates of the Caribbean, The Curse of the Black Pearl, a movie that meant so much to me as a kid. I did see that one in theaters, and I still love it. Love that Gore Verbinski Pirates trilogy. But I want to go with a maybe more interesting pick, and one that's such a personal favorite for me. This is Peyton Reed's Down with Love, a love letter to 1960s sex comedies and also 1959's Pillow Talk. Most often, this movie always gets compared to the Rock Hudson Doris Day romantic comedies, which are movies that I actually grew up with, weirdly enough. But also, the plot is taken so much from the Natalie Wood film Sex and the Single Girl. But it's a great love letter to those movies. It might even be better than most of those movies. It is better than Sex and the Single Girl, for sure. I love Renee Zellweger and Ewan McGregor in this movie so much. The visuals are out of this world great. It really captures that gorgeous look that like 1960s comedies had back in the day. It's got great music, such a great vibe. I think it's a perfect romantic comedy, and it's still not on Blu-ray, so I'm showing you my DVD, and man, I think this is a perfect one for Criterion. They should really release this. For 2004, we've got that sequel I was referring to, and no question, one of my absolute favorite films ever made in this world. That is Spider-Man 2. Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 2. Yeah, the original Spider-Man, it like opened my brain up to movies. Seeing that in the theaters when I was 9 years old. And Spider-Man 2 is an even better film. Just such an incredible villain with Alfred Molina as Dr. Octopus. Still my favorite comic book movie villain of all time. This movie has so much to say about heroism and about self-sacrifice in a way that, despite the fact that pretty much all superhero movies, they're all about heroism and such, so few of them comment on it at the level of deepness that this one does. It's actually like kind of a Frank Capra film dressed up as a Spider-Man movie. It's still my favorite comic book movie ever made. I genuinely think it's a masterpiece. Sam Raimi, he's just the best. But let's really switch gears for 2005 because we're talking about Joe Wright's adaptation of Pride and Prejudice. Now, I am a Jane Austen fan. I've read a couple of her books, including Pride and Prejudice, and I really do love this story. And this adaptation is incredible. Genuinely one of the best looking movies I've ever seen in my life. Like, whenever I watch this, my jaw is on the floor at the level of cinematography on display here. I love the period piece aspect of it. I love Keira Knightley's performance. She was nominated for an Oscar for this. And when it comes to like romantic dramas that are more so made for a female audience, I would say it's fair to say Pride and Prejudice is more so for a female audience. What I need to really get into it is a leading male character that I can really, be interested in and kind of identified with. And I love Matthew Macfadyen as Mr. Darcy. Mr. Darcy rules. I think he's awesome. Just this grouchy grump that is just secretly this amazing person. And the hand flex, come on, those who know, you know. This really is one of my favorite movies. I love Pride and Prejudice so much. Gotta be the top of 2005. For 2006, one of the greatest action films ever made, and I still think, despite the fact that I love the whole franchise, the best of its franchise. That is Casino Royale, the James Bond film that kicked off Daniel Craig's role as James Bond. And yeah, this is my James Bond Blu-ray collection, but that's not a good visual aid. Let's throw a poster up there. Casino Royale, I did see in the theaters with my dad. It's the movie that got me into James Bond movies. It blew my mind at the time, and it still blows my mind today. Daniel Craig, it's crazy how incredible he is in this role right out the gate, rivaling Sean Connery's performance, which is mind-blowing to achieve. The action on a level the Bond films have never had before, and frankly have never had since. This is still the best action scenes ever in a Bond film, and the best romance any of these films have ever had. The poker games are so intense, with Mads Mikkelsen being such an incredible villain. Yeah, I love the franchise. Like, I love the Connery films. I even love the Roger Moore films, which I know is a bit controversial, but I still think Casino Royale is the best. 2007, a film I definitely did not see in 2007, but has come to be such a favorite. That is Trick or Treat, kind of the ultimate Halloween movie. I mean, if you walk into any Spirit Halloween these days, you'll see Sam from Trick or Treat all over the place. Despite the fact that this movie was not a success when it came out, it kind of barely got a theatrical release. But it's come to be a movie that means a lot to me. My wife and I watch it every single Halloween night while we give out candy. I love all of the anthology segments. If you're curious, the one with the kids in the school bus is my favorite. I think that's just some incredible kids Halloween horror that does not hold back one bit, but I love all the segments. Trick or Treat is an amazing representation of just why I love the holiday of Halloween so much. Now, when I was a kid, I was really into comic book movies, and I still love them today, but I'm definitely not as into them. Like, you can tell, I'm more of a horror guy now. But 2008 saw the release of two landmark comic book films that I loved at the time, and like I still appreciate, but not as much as this comedy that I definitely didn't see back in the day, but I've come to love it so much. For 2008, I'm going with Forgetting Sarah Marshall. Yeah, this has really become one of my favorite comedies of all time, starring Jason Segel as a brokenhearted guy who Kristen Bell breaks up with at the beginning of the movie. He decides to travel to Hawaii to relax, to try to get away from it all. And by a crazy coincidence, his ex-girlfriend and her new boyfriend, played by Russell Brand, is there too. And he has to deal with them while also still falling in love with Mila Kunis along the way. Anyway, it's just absolutely hilarious. I care about these characters so much, and it ends with a puppet Dracula musical. And come on, if you got like a fun comedy with great Hawaiian atmosphere, there's also a Dracula musical in there. That movie is for me. 2009 is probably the most prolific year of all time for horror remakes, but I'm going with a horror movie that's not a remake, although it's very much in the spirit of a franchise that this director made in the past. That's Sam Raimi's Drag Me to Hell. Yes, Sam Raimi is back on the list. He's one of my favorite directors. And as much as I love the Evil Dead franchise, Drag Me to Hell is my favorite Sam Raimi horror movie. I think this movie is amazing. I love the witchiness of it. I love the kind of cruel irony to the events in this film that are heartbreaking, but just gut punching. I love the fun slapstick of the horror. And I'm a big fan of Alison Lohman in the lead role. And you got Justin Long in here too. This is an incredible horror film that I think is so much fun. Now for 2010, far and away my favorite Christopher Nolan film. Christopher Nolan is probably the biggest celebrity director of our time. And he's overall not really one of my personal favorite directors, although I think, he makes good movies. But nothing compares to Inception. I think Inception is far and away his best movie. Not a movie that I watch very often, that I rewatch a lot because, it's long and it's very cerebral. But whenever I do watch it, I have an amazing time. It engages my brain in a way where just watching Leonardo DiCaprio walk around with characters and explain the ridiculously intricate details of this dream heist thing, I find so interesting. I just love to hear it all explained, which, a movie's good if there's that. But then also just the action's great. It's got such a phenomenal supporting cast. I really do love Inception. At 2011, one of my favorite dramas ever made. I don't talk about dramas a lot on this channel because it's not one of my favorite genres, to be totally honest with you. I don't watch a lot of dramas, but this one I rewatch shockingly a lot. That is Alexander Payne's The Descendants, a movie where George Clooney, he's a middle-aged man who's facing the decision of whether or not to sell a property to a big company that's been in his family for generations. His wife is in a coma and she might not make it. And he doesn't know how to deal with that. He's trying to reconnect with his two daughters, who he hasn't really connected with that much because his wife has really handled the raising of the kids much more than he has. And this movie just has such a beautiful sense of calm, mellow melancholy. It's a sad movie, but it's also just so chill, and I love to live in it. Something about the gorgeous Hawaiian atmosphere juxtaposed with very sad people, I just find super relaxing. Great supporting cast in here, but George Clooney, I think, has never been better than in The Descendants. 2012 was a hard one because there was no movie that stands above the pack, like for most of these. It was a big year for the superhero genre. Christopher Nolan closed out his Batman trilogy. The Avengers came out, which is a movie that meant a lot to me at the time. Doesn't mean a lot to me now anymore. But I'm going to go with a horror movie that if I'm faced with all the movies in 2012, like which movie am I going to grab and put on? I think it's going to be Rob Zombie's Lords of Salem. Controversial pick. I know a lot of people don't love this. This really is one of my favorite witch movies. I think the witchcraft iconography is some of the most satisfying that's ever been put in movies outside of like Haxan. The demonic devil imagery too, just really, really creepy. I am a fan of Rob Zombie, not a perfect filmmaker, I know, but I am just very interested in his extremely distinct style. He's a very stylistic filmmaker who you can always tell when you're watching a Rob Zombie movie. And I think this is his best movie. And his wife, Sherry Moon Zombie, who's in all of his films, I think she's never been better than in this. People give her a lot of flack, but I think she is legitimately great in Lords of Salem. I think it's a great witchcraft horror movie, and I love it. For 2013, another year where nothing like stands head and shoulders above everything else, but yikes. All right, I'm just gonna leave that in. Edgar Wright's The World's End. I am a big fan of Edgar Wright's Cornetto trilogy, which is Shaun of the Dead, Hot Fuzz, and The World's End, but perhaps controversially again, The World's End is my favorite of the trilogy. I think it's amazing. I thought it was extremely funny when I saw it in theaters back in the day, but also the action scenes are great. The fight scenes between these are drunk main characters who are on a bar crawl against these alien body snatchers. Really, really funny fight scenes. And also this movie has a lot to say about aging, because Shaun of the Dead's very much about when you're in your early 30s, you're not a kid anymore. How do you move on into adulthood? Hot Fuzz, I'm not really sure what that's about thematically, to be honest with you. But this one is about when you're getting older. What do you do if you've never really moved on into adulthood, but all of your friends have? I think it's a pretty deep movie in addition to being hilarious and super, super fun. For 2014, no question here, it's The Guest. The Guest is one of my favorite independent horror films ever made by Adam Wingard, an incredible action. This movie's such a great genre bender because it starts out as a drama about a family who lost their son in the military, and one of his military friends comes to visit them, and they start accepting him into the family to sort of be the replacement for their son. But then it becomes a comedy. It gets really, really funny. And then it becomes an action action movie, and it's action-packed, and it's awesome. Dan Stevens is just incredible as this leading man. But then it becomes a horror film as Dan Stevens' character really turns. I was really, really into independent horror during this time. I still pop into it occasionally, but I'm not as dedicated to checking out all the indie horror movies as I used to be. But this is one of the absolute best from that time period. For 2015, another, I don't know if it's indie horror, but a low budget horror film that, man, this movie meant a lot to me when I saw it in theaters, because at that time, it was the scariest movie I'd ever seen in my life. And that is The Witch. I actually saw it with a friend of mine, and my friend didn't like it at all. He thought it was really boring, which surprised me because I was riveted and terrified in the theaters watching this movie. Probably the greatest witch film that has ever been made. Unbelievably satisfying, fascinating things to say about family and about religion. The witch iconography is also pretty incredible in this, like Lords of Salem, and it's just terrifying. It launched Robert Eggers' career, who I've come to love a lot, and I am so excited for his Nosferatu remake. It is far and away my most anticipated movie of this year, and it also launched Anya Taylor-Joy, who's become one of my favorite female starlets of our time, for sure. At 2016, another hilarious comedy. We've got The Nice Guys, one of the greatest comedies of all time. A 70s throwback to the buddy cop genre about a couple of private detectives played by Russell Crowe, who hadn't been this good in years, and Ryan Gosling giving one of the funniest performances I've ever seen in my life. Let Ryan Gosling make more comedies. I'm glad he was able to be funny again in Barbie, but this is probably his greatest performance, honestly. I think he should have won the Oscar for this movie, but instead he was nominated for the Oscar for La La Land, in which he's not near as good in. Like, he's good, but in The Nice Guys, incredible. I just love the 70s throwbackness. I love it's so funny. I love the windy mystery, and I just love the performance so much. The Nice Guys is amazing. For number 2017, truly one of my favorite movies of all time. And this is Guillermo del Toro's The Shape of Water. I'm a big fan of Guillermo del Toro. This is my favorite of his films, and often it gets knocked down by Guillermo del Toro fans and called overrated and such. And man, I love this movie. I think this is the film he was put on this earth to make. Just a gorgeous fairy tale horror monster romance. This also is some of the most beautiful cinematography I've ever seen, one of the most beautiful scores I've ever heard, a beautiful romance between Sally Hawkins, I love her performance in this, and a creature from the Black Lagoon-like creature. I find it shocking that I actually got invested in the romance of this film. I love it so much, and it's the only time in my life that the Best Picture winner at the Oscars was my favorite movie of the year. At the year 2018, definitely not my favorite movie of the year when it came out. In fact, when it came out, I saw it in theaters, like I see all the movies of this franchise. I wasn't that into it. Like, I didn't think it was that great. But upon rewatches, Avengers Infinity War has become my favorite movie of the Marvel Universe. I know it's cool to hate on the Marvel Universe. They meant a lot to me for a long time. I went to see all their movies in theaters for a long time, not quite anymore, to be honest with you. But Avengers Infinity War, I think, is the best of the whole franchise, despite being a part one of a larger story. And I'm a fan of Avengers Endgame as well. This feels like a fascinating and contained movie about one character, Thanos, a movie that focuses on the villain, such an interesting villain for a CGI creation played with motion capture and voice by Josh Brolin. I think this is just what the MCU does best. And when this came out on Blu-ray, despite the fact that I didn't like it, or on 4K, despite the fact that I didn't like it that much in theaters, I rewatched it several times. I watched it with the commentary. I think it's a great movie. Every scene is so incredibly entertaining. 2019, a movie from my favorite working director and possibly my new favorite of his movies. That is Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Another throwback, this time to the late 1960s, but the old movie retro nostalgia of this, I didn't find pointless. Like, I did find it really interesting, and I do love watching this movie visually for just, man, how much it really looks and feels like a movie from the 1960s. Incredible movie star performances from Leonardo DiCaprio, Margot Robbie, and most importantly, Brad Pitt. Man, Brad Pitt rules in this movie. And it's a movie that, you know, deals with some very tragic real life events around Margot Robbie's character of Sharon Tate. And the way this movie switches things up, I can understand people not liking the history revisionism that Quentin Tarantino does a lot. But I found it kind of a beautiful tribute to this woman who was taken out of this world far too early under horrifically tragic circumstances. Just a beautiful tribute to her. I thought it was wonderful. And this is a movie that's one of the most rewatchable movies ever. Like, this is another movie when it came out on Blu-ray, I watched it like over and over again, and I love it so much. For 2020, we're coming into the next decade. I didn't see a lot of movies for 2020 because the pandemic happened. I stopped going to the theaters like pretty much everybody else. And I just didn't catch up with a lot of new releases. But I did see this one in theaters before the pandemic hit early in the year. This is Color Out of Space, one of my favorite Lovecraft adaptations starring Nicolas Cage. This movie really captures the feel of H.P. Lovecraft, of that unexplainable, unknowable horror, just that cosmic horror. This movie is an incredible representation of that. About a family living out in the country. I really did care about this family, and when this movie built them up in the first act, I really, really liked them. I love Nicolas Cage's performance. Quirky, but not quite too quirky. And when the horror kicks in, it is indeed horrifying. I love this movie. Like I said, one of my favorite Lovecraft adaptions. 2021, I started going to the theaters again, and this movie I saw in theaters with no expectations, and I cannot even tell you how much it blew me away. That is James Wan's *Malignant*. Now, I like James Wan, but I'm not the biggest fan of his horror movies because I'm not the biggest fan of the very kind of safe haunted house movies that he makes. If you'll notice on my best of haunted house movies list that I put out a month or so ago, this movie none of James Wan's movies made the list because they just feel a little too safe and commercial for me. I went to see *Malignant* expecting the same thing, and what I got was a weird, bizarre, Dario Argento, Frank Henenlotter tribute movie, a true tribute to back when horror movies could be released like direct to DVD or even in theaters and just be weird as hell and not make money and then become successful on VHS tapes and then become cult classics. That's the kind of movie this is. I love this movie. It's so weird and out there in a way that I find incredibly entertaining, but also like really well made from a really talented director. That's just great to see. And Gabriel, he's a new horror icon, and I want a sequel. 2022, it is Matt Reeves' The Batman, a movie I didn't have a lot of faith in because whenever the actors or the director talked about it leading up to its release, they were just like, it's so dark and gritty and realistic. And to be honest with you, I'm feeling a little bit over dark, gritty, realistic Batman. Make him comic booky again, I say, like do something pulpy. But this movie was a little bit more comic booky and pulpy than I expected and grounded in all the right ways. I think it's a really intense detective story. I'm a huge fan of Robert Pattinson in the role. I thought he was incredible. I loved his look so much. It's a 3-hour movie that I saw twice in theaters and again when it came home. I love it so much. It's become one of my absolute favorite Batman movies. Probably my favorite other than the Michael Keaton ones. And then last year, I've talked about this movie a lot because it was my favorite movie last year. And I did miss a lot of movies last year because I've been pretty focused on old movies lately. But Cobweb, which is kind of ironic because the name of my channel. But I did really love this movie, the Halloween atmosphere of it, the sort of kids fairy tale type horror movie it is. Everything about this movie is creepy and unnerving. And when it got to the reveal of what is talking to this kid from behind his walls, which is a really creepy thing in and of itself, and you think maybe when the reveal happens, it's not going to be as creepy as the idea of just something talking to you from behind the walls. No, it was totally satisfying. Awesome, awesome creature design, incredible horror sequences involving that creature. Just, it satisfied me in all the ways I needed it to. Absolutely loved Cobweb, my favorite movie of 2023. That closes out the series, my friends. Thank you so much for watching. And if you have missed this series, check out this playlist right over here. I go decade by decade, my favorite movie every single year. And let me know down in the comments below, what's your favorite movie of every year of the 2000s? I would love if you would participate in this game. Give a like if you enjoy this and to subscribe because I've got another exciting decade series on the way. With all that said, don't forget to take some time to enjoy yourself today, and I will see you next time.